Frank, Zhang, and Hazel Levesque are a romantic couple from the Heroes of Olympus and the Trials of Apollo. In this video, I'll be explaining their relationship, how it started, and how it evolved throughout the books. As always, there will be spoilers, so there's your warning. And with that, let's get started. Frank and Hazel's relationship started in the Son of Neptune, but before that, let's give some background on who Frank and Hazel are. Frank Zhang is a Roman demigod of the war god Mars. He was raised by his mom and his grandmother, but he knew nothing about his dad because his dad was a god. His mother Emily Zhang was a mortal military soldier, and she unfortunately died in a war in Afghanistan. Frank attends his mother's funeral with his grandmother, and there, his grandmother revealed that his dad was a god. She didn't specify which god though, but this shifts to Frank joining the wolf house to be trained under the wolf goddess Lupa. After months of tough training, Frank manages to join Camp Jupiter, where he would eventually meet his future girlfriend Hazel. And now, let's go to Hazel's side and see how she got into Camp Jupiter in the first place. Hazel's past is pretty complicated, so hold on to me here. There's a reason why I did Frank's past first. But anyway, Hazel Levesque was born to Marie Levesque and the Roman god of the underworld Pluto on December 17, 1928. Before her birth, Marie was a seer and a poor woman, which is why she wished for all the riches in the world from Pluto. Pluto tried to warn Marie that it was too greedy of a wish, but Marie insisted on it. This wish would surface in Marie's daughter Hazel. Hazel could summon riches from the ground, but the problem was that the jewels and the rocks she got were all cursed. This made horrible rumors spread around Marie and Hazel, and instead of admitting that it was her fault, Marie took out her anger on Hazel. Growing up, Hazel was bullied, and there was only one person who understood her. This ended up being a guy her age named Sammy Valdez. Sammy was actually the great-grandfather of the demigod Leo Valdez, whom Hazel would meet later on. Hazel developed a crush on Sammy, and Sammy seemed to reciprocate her feelings. However, they were never in a romantic relationship because of what happened next. After hanging out with Sammy one day, Hazel goes home and witnesses Pluto arguing with Marie. Pluto ends up talking with Hazel, and he tells her that her curse would one day be erased by a descendant of Neptune. This ends with Pluto leaving, and this prompts Hazel and Marie to travel north and move out completely. Little did anybody know that during this time, Gaia was possessing Marie, and one highlight of this was when Gaia used Marie and Hazel to resurrect the giant Alcyones. Marie needed to be sacrificed to complete the resurrection, but Hazel refused. Hazel summoned all of the riches in the cave and the roof collapsed. In one big explosion, Hazel and Marie both died. They found themselves in the underworld and were moved to the fields of Asphodel. Despite being sentenced there, Hazel remembered her life and had memories, a trait that the spirits of Asphodel did not have. Hazel would spend the next 70 years there, until a demigod by the name of Nico Angelo visited the fields of Asphodel as he looked for his sister Bianca. Nico was the son of Hades, the Greek version of Pluto, and that made him Hazel's half-brother. Nico met Hazel there, and feeling pity for her, he took her out of the underworld and brought her back to life through the doors of death. Bringing her back to life had a side effect on Hazel, which included random blackout episodes when she tried remembering her past, but otherwise, she was once again a living person. Hazel would go on to train under Lupa's wolf house until she was finally fit to go to Camp Jupiter. There, she met and became friends with Jason Grace, a demigod son of Jupiter, Reyna Ramirez-Arellano, a demigod daughter of Bellona, and her future boyfriend, Frank Zhang. Hazel and Frank became very close friends, and Hazel developed a crush on him. And now, let's finally go to the Son of Neptune, where we formally meet them. Around this time, Hazel and Frank held secret crushes on each other, but they weren't admitting it. On Hazel's part, she was aware that she liked Frank, but the thing is, she was determined to not fall in love with him. This because people around Camp Jupiter bullied Hazel and Frank, and they made a joke wherein Frank and Hazel should date because they were the biggest losers in camp. There were some Romans who speculated on Hazel's past, which made odd rumors about her, but Frank didn't care about them and accepted her. Frank loved Hazel's company and was the nicest person to her, but Hazel worried he would stop acting that way if he knew about her past, as if you think about it, it is pretty weird. Later on, Hazel and Frank befriend and meet Percy Jackson, and the three of them get to a quest together. They ride on the Roman boat called Pax, and on the ride, Hazel gets seasick. Frank immediately gets worried and tries to calm her down by giving her a salt-lined cracker. But because he was so worried, Frank accidentally broke the crackers under his fingers. Hazel just laughed it off, and when she got a blackout, Frank was once again worried about her and tries his best to help her. He starts asking about her health, and Hazel admits a bit of her past, about how she actually died and came back to life. Hazel expected that he'd abandon her because of how weird it was, but Frank did not. He accepted her again and didn't judge her one bit. He even admits that Hazel didn't need to be scared about confessing secrets because she wasn't the only one with them. This references Frank's deepest insecurity, which was a piece of firewood that he was given on his birth. This firewood represented Frank's lifeline, and that if it burned, he'd die with it. Frank wasn't able to explain any of this though, because Hazel was attacked by a creature called Carpoi. Frank and Percy save Hazel, and throughout the journey, they defend each other against enemies. At one point, the topic of Hazel's past is brought up again, and Hazel finally admits everything. Once again, Frank did not judge Hazel for it and listened to her explain. This moment probably prompted Frank to also admit his firewood secret, as he does it later on, and he actually gives the firewood itself to Hazel. This moment shows just how much Frank loves and cares for Hazel, because just imagine giving someone something that literally represents your life. Like, the amount of trust you have towards that person is immaculate, and this moment is arguably one of their best in my opinion. Frank and Hazel bond more throughout this book, and there were many moments when one of them wanted to kiss the other. They finally had their first kiss after they defeated Alkyones, and this started their romantic relationship. And now, let's go to the Mark of Athena. This book challenges Frank and Hazel's relationship quite a bit, and that's because of the presence of the demigod Leo Valdez. But let's give a bit of background on why they met Leo in the first place. In this book, the Romans and the Greeks decided to finally meet, and from Camp Haplid were the demigods on the Argo too. Among them was Leo Valdez, and if you've been paying attention to this video, you'd remember that last name of Valdez, because Hazel's first crush in the past was named Sammy Valdez. Sammy was Leo's grandfather, and when the Greeks landed in Camp Jupiter, Hazel met Leo and got flashbacks of Sammy. An idea that was never clearly stated in this book, and has been a debate among fans, is the fact that Leo had a crush on Hazel. Personally, this was my take on it when I read The Mark of Athena, as Leo and Hazel do get close around this book, and there were some moments that made me question if they actually liked each other. Leo comments that Hazel was cute, but it never really developed into something more than that. After meeting the Greeks, the Romans are shocked when a possessed Leo attacks Camp Jupiter with the Argo II. This leads the Greeks with Frank and Hazel to escape on the ship, and they confront Leo. Frank gets suspicious about Leo because of Hazel's past with Sammy, and there's always been this tension between Frank and Leo. It doesn't help that Leo constantly makes jokes about Frank that hurt Frank's self-esteem. At one point, Hazel decides to explain to Leo what happened between her and Sammy, so she and Leo go into a blackout together and hold hands. After the blackout, the ship was being attacked, and Frank walked in on the two of them holding hands. Frank gets jealous, and the seven are thrown in an underwater cell. Coincidentally, Frank and Leo are trapped in the same cell, and this prompts the two of them to talk it out. Here, Leo makes it clear that nothing romantic was going on between him and Hazel, but he knows to himself that Hazel was pretty. So this sort of supports my theory that Leo just had a crush or an attraction towards Hazel, but it was not supposed to be anything serious. Later on, Hazel talks to Leo and tells him to go easy on Frank, and that part of the reason Frank disliked Leo was because of Leo's fire abilities that could affect Frank's firewood. From there, the strain in Frank and Leo's relationship eases a little bit as they save each other a couple of times in the book, and the book ends with Leo and Frank making up. And now, let's go to the House of Hades. Frank and Hazel's relationship become more stable after this, and it's clear that they love each other so much. When Frank, Hazel, and Nico go to Venice, they are attacked by Al-Abbas. Hazel gets poisoned after the attack, and desperate to save her, Frank asks for the help of Triptolemus, a minor god. However, Trip refused to heal Hazel without something in return. Mars then mentally tells Frank that Frank should kill all the Al-Abbas in Venice to get a serpent for Trip's chariot in exchange for healing Hazel. and without any other choice, Frank agrees. Frank becomes successful with the blessing of Mars to help him in the attacks, which makes him literally glow and look terrifying. Hazel is healed and thanks Frank, but she worries that Frank changed into a different person with that much power. However, this was not the case because Frank was still the same self even with the flashier powers. Later on, the seven fight together in a necromantion, and Frank and Hazel helped in the fight. Here, the praetor Jason Grace gave his praetorship to Frank, and with this new power, Frank becomes a literal beast in the battle. Hazel congratulates him on the promotion, and now, let's go to the Blood of Olympus. Here, Frank and Hazel sort of fade into the background, but what we do know is that their relationship was going strong. They loved each other so much, and we see them both devastated by Leo's sacrifice and death after Gaia's defeat. The two of them hung out and consoled each other in Camp Haplid for a couple of days, and before they left for Camp Jupiter, they had a nice chat and said goodbye to Nico D'Angelo. Not that much is known about Frank and Hazel's relationship after that, but a major event happens to them in the Tyrant's tomb, the fourth book in the Trials of Apollo. Hazel and Frank are still together, and they're pretty much deep in love. A funeral was held for their best friend Jason, and both of them mourn their friend's death. Though Hazel and Frank's relationship is going strong, something is a bit off. Hazel admits to a now mortal Apollo that Frank has been becoming more reckless and bold in quests. She worries that he's taking it a bit too far and that Frank might have a death wish. When Apollo talks with Frank, Frank admits that he knows Hazel is worried about him, but that Frank doesn't care about being close to death anymore because he wants to be in control of his life. Before leaving on a quest, Frank and Hazel talk, and this is probably concerning Frank's behavior. The highlight of this book is the battle that raged against the zombies and the triumvirate's forces, as in this battle, Frank and Apollo went against Commodus and Caligula. Commodus attacks Apollo while Frank goes after Caligula. Frank fought bravely and managed to lure Caligula into a cave of explosives. To trigger the bombs, Frank burns his lifeline firewood and explodes the cavern. This sacrifice kills both Caligula and Frank, but Frank doesn't care as this was Frank's way of avenging Jason's death. This because in the previous book, The Burning Maze, Caligula had killed Jason. Apollo mourns Frank's death. When Hazel meets Apollo, Apollo can't speak of what happened, which gives Hazel the idea that something horrible happened to Frank. Hazel starts crying but composes herself as Tarquin is the next enemy and he was still alive. Grief-stricken and angry, Hazel attacks Tarquin, and in her rage, she managed to kill him with the goddess of the hunt, Diana. When they walk out of there, Hazel meets up with the rest, and they see her horse, Aryan, running over to them with a body. It was Frank, and he fainted after saying hi. Frank is brought to a medical tent, and once he wakes up, we get a conclusion on how he survived. Apollo deduced that Frank controlled his fate and accepted it, which is why Frank survived. And by the end of the book, Reyna resigns from her praetor position. Hazel gets elected as the new praetor, and her reign with Frank starts from that moment. The last we ever get of Frank and Hazel is in the Tower of Nero. Here, Apollo visits Frank and Hazel, repairing the camp after the battle in the previous book. Hazel and Frank also reveal that Hazel's curse seems to be gone now, and that Frank might be the descendant of Neptune whom Pluto had mentioned before. This because Frank was actually a legacy of Neptune. Because of this, Hazel can now use her powers to create jewels and gold without any trouble or curse to worry about. And that's all we know about Frank and Hazel's relationship so far. Frank and Hazel are one of the cutest couples in these books. They started out as best friends who harbored secret feelings for each other until they managed to get together. Through the many quests and challenges they faced, they always stayed strong and true to each other. And that makes them one of the strongest couples in these books. So, how about you? What do you think of Frank and Hazel? Let me know in the comments down below.